Ladies and gentlemen, federal employees, how does working for the government, the federal government, compare to working in the private sector? What are the key things to know comparing benefits, the pros and cons? So if you're considering entering the federal workforce or leaving the federal workforce, you gotta know the key things that you are giving up or getting when making these sort of decisions. Some of them are easy to replicate, some are very difficult to replicate, and some make a massive difference on when you can retire. So let's dive in. If you're new to the channel, so good to have you. My name is Dallin Haas. I'm a financial planner who serves federal employees all day long, and I absolutely love it. So let's talk about the private sector really quick, then we'll talk about the federal side. Number one, obviously the private sector has lots of different variations. We know exactly what the federal government has to offer when it comes to employment, but the private sector has tons of different versions, right? Every company has slightly different benefits and packages. So let me just go over some generic things just to keep them in mind. Number one, does it pay more, right? Some positions, if you take a job with the government, you're going to take a pay cut, right? Some positions you will just get paid more in the private sector. That's not true for all positions. Obviously, you would know your position probably better than I would, but I've seen great evidence for both. Some positions, they actually make way more with the government, some they don't. So that's the first thing to keep in mind is which one do you just have a higher pay, right? Next, 401k. TSP obviously is what you have with the government, which is similar to a 401k. But the big question to ask with the 401k is, do they have matching contributions, right? The TSP matches 5%. The first 5% of your salary you put in, they'll match as well. So what does their 401k, if you're comparing, what do they match, if any? And the TSP has incredibly low fees. It may be hard to know if the plan you're looking at has low fees or not. Maybe that's hard to come by. I'm not sure that information. But that'd be one thing to keep in mind is most 401ks have slightly higher fees than TSP does. Now, I can't speak to all 401ks. There's certainly exceptions. But most of the time, TSP is going to have lower fees overall. Next, what insurance does the private sector employer offer you? Do they have health insurance? What part of the premiums do they pay for? The government pays about 70% of the premiums, and they'll continue to do that into retirement. Now, that's the rare part. Many private sector employers, at least I've seen, actually will have great insurance while you're employed. Not all have great insurance at all, but most, if they do have great insurance, they offer it while you're employed. And then when you retire, most of the time it goes away or it phases out or it changes. So that's the first question to ask if you're considering leaving. Is the employer you're going to, do they have insurance? What piece of the premiums do they pay for? And does that change when you retire from that job? So those are the key things to consider when looking at a private sector job. Let's talk about all the key benefits that the federal government has. Number one, pension. Obviously, most private sector employers don't offer pensions. They only have 401ks. That can be a massive, massive difference. Now, let me do an example here. How do we know what the pension is worth, right? I mean, if you go to a private sector and get paid more, is that worth not getting a pension? It's a good question, right? Well, here's a quick rule of thumb to figure out how much a pension is worth, right? So, for example, let's say if you work for the government, let's say you would get a pension of $40,000 a year. Now, I've got whole videos on how to calculate federal pensions. You can go check that out. But let's say your pension is $40,000 a year. And that will, of course, last for the rest of your life. How much more would you have to be paid on the in the private sector to make it worth giving up that pension? Well, you have to ask how much money, basically, if you just get paid more and don't have a pension, you would have to save at least a piece of those higher earnings, put it into investments so that those investments can produce for you, hopefully, the $40,000 a year, right? That's the goal. So how much extra would you have to have in investments to produce $40,000 a year for the rest of your life? Well, a simple way to estimate it is to use the 4% rule. Now, if you're not familiar with the 4% rule, you can look it up, but it's a simple way to estimate how much your investment can conservatively produce over a retirement. Long story short, it's 4% of whatever you have. So, long story short, it would take $1 million. It would take $1 million of investments to conservatively produce $40,000 a year of income for the rest of your life. Okay, so you'd have to be paid more in the private sector side So much more that you can save and invest and accumulate $1 million extra from that higher pay to make up for not having a $40,000 pension, right? Sometimes that's hard to do. And the government also has the FERS supplement. I've got whole videos if you want the full story of what the FERS supplement is, but it's basically additional dollars that most feds can get between 57 and 62 if you're retired by then, and it's in addition to your pension. It bridges the gap between when you might retire and when Social Security starts at 62, which most private sector employers have nothing like that, right? Next, TSP. Again, what are the fees? What do they match? Okay, I talked about that already. FEHB. This is one of the key reasons that federal employees can retire before age 65. If you talk to most people in the private sector, most of them simply just don't retire before 65 because that's when Medicare kicks in. Most private sector employers just don't have health insurance that lasts for their employers or employees into retirement. So these employees have just to wait till 65 till they have Medicare. Having FEHB and being able to keep that into retirement, again, FEHB is the government health insurance, if you didn't know that. Being able to keep that into retirement and the government keeps paying their portion, that's hard to replicate. Now, there's some employers that do, but most don't. Okay? So this is a snapshot. Obviously, there's other factors, whether it's be how much time off you have, work-life balance, those sort of factors. But these are some of the financial factors to consider when thinking about staying with the government, leaving, what it would take to replicate some of the benefits, and all of these things. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.